The confrontation ended almost as soon as it became visible. Those closest would later agree on one detail: there was no anger, no warning, and no visible effort. Bruce Lee did not raise his voice. He did not change his posture. 4 seconds after the remark was made, the room understood something had shifted. No explanation followed. No challenge was accepted. Yet years later, the people who were there would say the same thing. They never looked at public strength the same way again. The arena was already full long before anything happened. Not full in the sense of noise or spectacle, but full of presence. Fighters, trainers, promoters, and observers moved through the space with the casual familiarity of people who had spent years around combat without needing to announce it. Conversations were short. Handshakes were brief. Most people were there to watch, not to be seen. This was not the center of the event. It was the perimeter, rows of folding chairs, narrow walkways, the edges where real assessments often occurred. Away from spotlights, reputations circulated quietly. Who was strong? Who was dangerous? Who was overrated? These judgments traveled faster here than inside any ring. Bruce Lee sat among them without distinction. There was no entourage, no attempt to claim attention. He did not dress like a star, nor like someone looking to prove he belonged. To most of the people passing by, he appeared simply as another attendee, alert, composed, and unhurried. He did not scan the room. He did not lean forward in anticipation. His posture suggested familiarity, as though he had already seen enough in places like this. Those who recognized him noticed something else. He was not watching the fights in the conventional sense. His eyes moved selectively, not following punches but transitions, not power but balance. He observed the way bodies occupied space before contact was made, the moments just before effort revealed itself. To anyone trained in surface-level competition, this might have seemed like a distraction. To those who understood restraint, it was something else entirely. Bruce Lee was not there to measure strength. He was there to observe behavior. Around him, the environment continued as expected. Muscles flexed casually. Jokes were exchanged about who would dominate whom. Some of the men present had built their identities around physical certainty. Size and conditioning were worn openly, almost defensively, as if constant display was required to maintain belief. This was a culture where silence was often mistaken for uncertainty. And yet Bruce Lee remained silent not because he lacked confidence, but because there was no need to spend it. Those sitting near him would later recall the same detail. He seemed unusually settled for someone surrounded by so much posturing. There was no tension in his shoulders, no anticipation in his breathing. His presence did not challenge the room, but it also did not yield to it. He existed alongside it, unaffected. The arena itself reinforced this contrast. Posters of champions lined the walls, photographs of exaggerated poses, frozen moments of force and dominance. They celebrated outcomes. Bruce Lee, seated beneath them, appeared uninterested in outcomes altogether. At one point, someone nearby made a casual remark about size, about how modern fighters were bigger, stronger, more impressive than ever before. The comment was not directed at him. It did not need to be. In places like this, statements were often made to test the air, to see who reacted. Bruce Lee did not. His stillness did not invite confrontation. It removed it. The lack of response left the comment unfinished, hanging briefly before being absorbed by the noise of the room. That absence of reaction would later be remembered as the first signal, though no one recognized it at the time. This was not a man preparing for a moment. It was a man already beyond it. As the event continued, another presence began to draw attention, not from the edge, but from the center of movement. Conversations subtly shifted direction. Eyes followed a larger shape passing through the crowd. The tone of the space adjusted, almost imperceptibly, as physical authority entered the shared awareness. Bruce Lee did not turn immediately. He did not need to. The environment had already begun to change on its own. Bolo Yeung did not announce himself. He did not need to. His arrival altered the atmosphere in a way that was difficult to describe without resorting to comparisons. He was not simply large. Many men in that arena were large. He was not merely conditioned. Discipline was common in places like this. What set him apart was how his body carried certainty, as if mass itself had learned to move with intention. People noticed him before they fully saw him. Conversations slowed as he passed, not because he demanded attention, but because attention was drawn to him naturally. His shoulders filled doorways, his arms hung with a density that suggested years of repetitive labor, not performance. Even at rest, there was an impression of readiness, something coiled but comfortable, accustomed to being relied upon. Bolo Yeung had built a reputation that traveled ahead of him. He was known not just for size, but for seriousness, for a way of training that treated the body as something to be hardened rather than displayed. Among those present, his presence represented a particular kind of authority, the kind that comes from visible proof. Muscle as evidence, structure as argument. When men spoke of strength in that environment, they often did so in reference to someone like him. He moved through the arena with familiarity, greeting a few people with brief nods, acknowledging others with minimal words. There was no insecurity in his manner, no need to assess who was watching. He had already been assessed many times over, and the conclusions were widely accepted. This was the form of dominance most people understood. It was measurable, visible, reassuring. Against that backdrop, Bruce Lee remained seated near the edge, unchanged. He did not shift his posture when Bolo passed within view. He did not look away either. His gaze, when it met the movement in the room, was neutral, observational, without comparison. To some nearby, the contrast was striking. Bolo Yeung embodied physical certainty in its most recognizable form. Bruce Lee embodied something harder to define. He did not appear smaller in the presence of greater mass. He appeared unrelated to it. This was not humility in the conventional sense. It was a separation. At one point, a small group formed around Bolo. Questions were asked about training, about weight, about discipline. Answers were given plainly. There was respect in the exchange, but also a quiet reinforcement of hierarchy. When people stand near someone like that, they often adjust their posture unconsciously. Shoulders roll back, chests rise. Proximity becomes a way of borrowing confidence. Bruce Lee did not join the group. He remained where he was, listening only insofar as the environment required it. His attention drifted not toward the center of the discussion, but toward the reactions it produced. The way others oriented themselves, the way certainty spread simply by being seen. This was the mechanism he understood well. Authority, when based solely on appearance, travels quickly. It fills gaps in knowledge. It is convincing without explanation. But it also depends on agreement, on the unspoken consent of those observing. That consent was present in the room. Bolo Yeung did not seek it, but he carried it with him. As the minutes passed, familiarity turned into comfort. The group around him relaxed. Laughter appeared. Confidence grew louder. The environment leaned toward display again, reassured by the presence of something solid and undeniable. And in that comfort, boundaries began to loosen. It was not intentional. It rarely is. In spaces like this, where strength is assumed and rarely questioned, comments begin to surface. Observations become evaluations. Evaluations drift toward comparison. Comparison invites judgment. Bruce Lee, still seated at the perimeter, remained an unspoken variable. To some, he was already known. To others, he was merely another quiet figure in a room full of louder ones. His lack of display made him easy to overlook, and easier for a certain kind of confidence to underestimate. That underestimation did not come from hostility. It came from assumption. And assumption, in environments built on physical proof, often feels safe. The room, settled now into its hierarchy, did not realize it had just completed its setup. The comment was not delivered with the intention to provoke. That was the detail witnesses would emphasize years later. It was not shouted across the room nor framed as a challenge. It emerged the way many remarks do in spaces where confidence has gone untested for too long, casually, almost carelessly. supported by laughter and familiarity. It was said within the circle that had formed around Bolo Yeung. The group had grown comfortable. The initial respect had softened into ease. Training methods were being compared. Stories were shared. Someone made a remark about how modern conditioning had changed the standards of combat. Another added something about how size had become the deciding factor. The tone was conversational, but the implication was clear. Then a name surfaced, not addressed directly, not pointed, spoken as reference: Bruce Lee. There was a pause, not because the speaker hesitated, but because the room registered the shift. Names carry weight differently than opinions. Some names invite debate. Others introduce history, even when that history is not fully understood. The remark itself was brief. Something about how things looked impressive on screen. About how real strength showed itself differently in person. About how size and power settled questions quickly when appearances were removed. There was laughter, but it did not spread evenly. A few people glanced toward the perimeter, toward the quiet figure who had not moved since the conversation began. The comment had not been directed at him, but it had reached him all the same. In spaces like this, sound travels selectively. Certain words find their way to their subjects without effort. Bruce Lee did not react. Those closest to him noticed that first. No tightening of the jaw. No shift in posture. No interruption of breath. He remained exactly as he had been moments before, hands relaxed, shoulders neutral, gaze steady. That lack of response unsettled some of the observers. In most confrontations, escalation is visible. A look, a word, a physical adjustment that signals intent. None of that occurred. The absence of reaction made it difficult to read what, if anything, would follow. Within the group, the speaker continued, encouraged by the lack of immediate consequence. The tone stayed light. The comments did not become more aggressive, but they became more confident. When nothing happens, people often interpret it as permission. Bolo Yeung listened without expression. He did not join in the commentary, nor did he stop it. His presence alone seemed to legitimize the conversation. In rooms like this, silence from a dominant figure is often taken as agreement, even when none is intended. Another glance toward the perimeter. This time Bruce Lee looked up. Not sharply, not dramatically. His eyes moved with the same measured economy he had shown all evening. He did not lock on to the speaker. He did not survey the group. He simply acknowledged that something had entered his awareness. That moment, brief and unremarkable to most, would later be identified as the turning point. There was no visible emotion attached to it, no irritation, no amusement, just recognition. The speaker noticed. The laughter tapered off, not abruptly, but enough to register. Words began to trail rather than land. The rhythm of the conversation changed. What had felt easy moments before now required effort to sustain. No one spoke directly to Bruce Lee. No one apologized. No one challenged him either. The remark existed in an unresolved space suspended between intent and consequence. In many situations, this is where tension escalates. Voices rise, positions harden, pride seeks an exit through confrontation. But this environment, conditioned by reputation and observation, responded differently. Silence began to spread. It moved unevenly at first, then more completely. The group around Bolo sensed it, though few could explain why. Something about the room had shifted from casual to expectant, not excited, not fearful, simply alert. Bruce Lee stood. He did not do so abruptly. He did not push his chair back. He rose as if continuing a movement that had already begun elsewhere. The motion was economical, unhurried, and without emphasis. Still, it drew attention. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was the first deliberate action he had taken all evening. No words were exchanged. No one stepped forward. The comment had been made. It had been heard. And now, without announcement or agreement, the moment that followed it had arrived. The room waited, quietly, for something it could not yet name. What followed did not resemble confrontation. There was no closing of distance in the way people expect when tensions rise. No raised hands. No shift into a fighting stance. Bruce Lee did not angle his body toward anyone in particular. He stood where he was, neither advancing nor retreating, allowing the space to settle around him. This, more than anything else, unsettled the room. In environments shaped by physical hierarchy, stillness is often read as uncertainty. But this was a different kind of stillness. It did not ask for interpretation. It did not invite a response. It existed as its own statement, complete and unaltered by observation. Those closest noticed how little he occupied the space. His weight appeared evenly distributed. His shoulders were relaxed, not squared. His hands rested naturally at his sides, fingers loose. There was no tension to feed off of, no visible preparation that could be tracked or anticipated. It was as though he had removed himself from the usual sequence of cause and effect. The group around Bolo Yeung shifted subtly. Someone cleared their throat, another adjusted their footing. These movements were small, but they marked the first visible signs of discomfort. The atmosphere had changed from casual to undefined, and undefined situations are difficult for confident people to navigate. Bolo turned slightly, not fully toward Bruce Lee, but enough to acknowledge his presence directly. There was no hostility in the movement. If anything, it was exploratory, an attempt to understand what, if anything, was being asked of him. Bruce Lee met the glance without expression. He did not challenge it. He did not avoid it. His eyes remained steady but not fixed. There was no narrowing, no hardening, just attention, undramatic and complete. Witnesses would later struggle to describe this moment because nothing outwardly happened. Yet everyone felt it. The silence deepened. The ambient noise of the arena, footsteps, distant voices, the muffled sounds of activity beyond the walls seemed to recede. Not because it disappeared, but because it no longer mattered. The focus had narrowed without anyone consciously directing it. Someone laughed briefly. It was not mocking, it was reflexive, an attempt to dissolve tension by reintroducing normalcy. The sound lingered for less than a second before fading, unsupported by any response. Bruce Lee did not react. He did not acknowledge the laughter. He did not glance toward it. His stillness absorbed it completely, leaving it without effect. That was when the room understood that this was not a verbal exchange. No words would be offered, no explanations given. Whatever was about to happen would occur without framing, without justification, and without audience accommodation. The absence of ceremony was deliberate. Bruce Lee took a single step forward, not toward Bolo Yeung specifically, but into a neutral space between them. The step was small, almost negligible, yet it redefined the geometry of the room. Distances that had felt comfortable moments earlier now felt exposed. He stopped. Again, nothing followed immediately. This pause, measured, unforced, was later remembered as the longest moment of the evening, not because of its duration, but because of its density. Time did not stretch, attention did. Bolo Yeung did not move, he did not brace, he did not step back. His posture remained upright, confident, unchanged. From the outside, it appeared that nothing had altered. But those watching closely noticed something subtle. His weight had shifted slightly forward. Not in preparation to strike, but in anticipation. His body, trained to respond to physical cues, was waiting for one that did not arrive. Bruce Lee's posture offered none. No telegraph, no tension, no signal that could be read or intercepted. The usual indicators of motion were absent, leaving the body in front of him without reference. This absence was not accidental, it was controlled. In that suspended space, where expectation existed without direction, the psychological balance began to tilt. The advantage no longer belonged to the one with greater mass or visible power. It belonged to the one who had removed predictability from the equation. The room leaned inward, collectively holding its breath without realizing it. And then, without warning or emphasis, the stillness ended. No one later agreed on the exact sequence. That was the first complication in retelling what happened next. Accounts differed not because of exaggeration, but because the event itself resisted clean observation. It was too brief, too contained, and too unlike what most people were accustomed to watching. What everyone did agree on was this: it ended before anyone had time to react. There was no visible wind-up, No step that could be identified as an attack. No exchange that resembled a fight. One moment, both men were standing within reach of one another. Next, the balance of the situation had changed completely. Those closest described a sudden compression of space. Bruce Lee moved, but not forward in the conventional sense. His body did not surge, it aligned. A minimal adjustment so small it barely registered placed him where he needed to be. His hands rose and fell within the same breath, not striking outward but redirecting inward. Bolo Yeung did not fall. That detail surprised many later listeners. They expected collapse, impact, spectacle. None of that occurred. Instead, something more unsettling took place. Bolo's posture broke, not dramatically but unmistakably. His shoulders dipped, his breath escaped sharply, not from pain but from interruption. For a brief moment, less than the span of a heartbeat, his body stopped responding to intention. It was enough. The demonstration concluded almost immediately after it began. Bruce Lee did not follow up. He did not advance. He did not hold his position, as if to display dominance. He simply stepped back, returning to where he had been moments before. The entire exchange lasted no more than 4 seconds. Those 4 seconds were not filled with motion. They were filled with consequences. Bolo Yeung straightened slowly. There was no anger on his face, no embarrassment. His expression suggested surprise, followed by something closer to recognition. He adjusted his stance not to continue, but to recover his internal balance. His breathing normalized. His eyes met Bruce Lee's briefly, then looked away. Nothing more was offered. No explanation, no challenge, no acknowledgement beyond what had already been communicated through the body. Bruce Lee did not wait for a response. He did not seek confirmation that the message had landed. He turned and walked back toward the perimeter. The room remained silent. People searched for something to react to, noise, motion, aftermath. But there was nothing left to engage with, no fight to analyze, no technique to praise, no visible injury to justify discussion. And yet, everyone present understood that something definitive had occurred. The demonstration had not been about power, it had been about access. Bruce Lee had entered a space that appeared secure and exited it unchanged, leaving behind a subtle but undeniable disruption. The implication was clear without being stated. Physical presence alone was not protection. Strength without adaptability was incomplete. Bolo Yeung remained standing among the group, but the shape of the circle around him had altered. It no longer felt closed. Conversations did not resume immediately. No one joked. No one filled the silence. The confidence that had supported the earlier remark did not return, not because it had been crushed, but because it had been exposed. In the absence of spectacle, the room was left with only its own understanding to process what it had witnessed. And understanding in moments like this arrives slowly. The laughter did not come back. The hierarchy did not reassert itself. What remained was a quiet awareness that something fundamental had been demonstrated, and that it would not be repeated because it did not need to be. The silence that followed was not imposed. No one asked for it. No authority enforced it. It emerged naturally, as if the room itself required time to recalibrate. People remained in place, but their attention no longer moved outward. It turned inward, each observer privately reassessing what they believed they had just seen. This was not a shock. Shock produces noise. It invites commentary. What lingered instead was restraint, an unspoken agreement that speaking too quickly would reduce the moment rather than clarify it. Bolo Yeung stayed where he was. He did not retreat. He did not seek reassurance from those around him. His composure remained intact, but something had shifted beneath it. Those familiar with physical dominance noticed the change first. It was not visible in posture or expression, but in stillness of a different kind, the stillness that follows correction. He had not been challenged publicly. He had been interrupted. That distinction mattered. The group that had gathered around him earlier did not reform in the same way. Individuals lingered, then drifted. Conversations resumed elsewhere, quieter than before, focused on neutral subjects. The previous energy did not migrate, it dissipated. People avoided reenacting the moment with words. Those who tried to describe what had happened struggled almost immediately. Phrases failed to capture the absence of struggle, the lack of aggression, the speed without violence. Each attempt ended with a pause, followed by the same conclusion: you had to be there. Bruce Lee did not become the center of attention afterward. That, too, surprised many. He did not receive nods of approval. No one approached him for an explanation. There was no sudden shift in social gravity. He returned to his seat at the perimeter and resumed observing, as if nothing of note had occurred. This refusal to capitalize on the moment sealed its impact. In environments driven by reputation, moments like this are often converted into stories immediately. Allies gather, narratives form, status is reinforced through repetition. Bruce Lee allowed none of that to happen. He offered no narrative. By withholding commentary, he prevented interpretation from hardening into myth too quickly. The event remained unresolved in the minds of those who witnessed it, forcing them to carry it forward unprocessed. Bolo Yeung, for his part, did not attempt to reclaim the space. There was no rematch proposed, no clarifying statement offered. His silence carried weight equal to Bruce Lee's. It signaled understanding rather than defeat. Among experienced fighters, this kind of silence is not submission. It is an acknowledgement. The earlier remark was not revisited, not corrected, not defended. It simply ceased to exist. Without reinforcement, it lost relevance, as though it had never been spoken at all. That erasure was complete. As the event continued, the arena slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Matches resumed, noise returned in waves, yet something remained altered beneath the surface. The assumptions that had framed the evening no longer felt stable. Strength was still respected. The size was still impressive, but certainty had been complicated. Those who had witnessed the exchange found themselves watching differently. They paid more attention to transitions than to impact, to balance rather than force, to moments of stillness that preceded movement. The lesson was not announced. It did not need to be. Bruce Lee eventually stood again, not to engage but to leave. His departure was as quiet as his arrival. Few noticed it at the moment. Fewer still understood that the most significant action of the evening had already concluded. What followed him out of the room was not attention, but something more persistent: doubt. Not the paralyzing kind, but the productive kind, the kind that forces reconsideration. That doubt lingered long after the chairs were folded and the lights dimmed. It traveled with the witnesses into other rooms, other conversations, other years. And it did its work there, slowly, without needing reinforcement. The incident was never formally recorded. There was no footage preserved for analysis, no official account issued afterward. It survived only through repetition, quietly at first, then with increasing certainty, as those who had been present carried it into other spaces, training halls, private conversations, late-night discussions where credibility mattered and exaggeration did not. The story changed very little over time. That, more than anything, gave it weight. Details were debated, but the structure remained intact. A remark made casually, a response without words, a demonstration so brief it resisted description, and a silence afterward that felt deliberate rather than awkward. Those who retold it did not speak of victory. They spoke of correction. Years later, when Bruce Lee's name began to circulate more widely, some remembered that evening differently. What had once seemed like an isolated moment of restraint began to resemble a pattern. Others recalled similar stories, public settings, understated responses, decisive conclusions that left no room for escalation. This incident fit seamlessly among them, not because it was dramatic, but because it was consistent. Bolo Yeung's career continued. His reputation remained intact. In some ways, it deepened. Among those who understood physical culture, his silence about the event was interpreted as maturity. He did not diminish the moment by reframing it. He did not attempt to reclaim authority through denial. He allowed the experience to stand as it was. That restraint ensured the story endured without bitterness. As years passed, the lesson embedded itself into the culture quietly, not as a rule but as a reference point. When discussions arose about size versus speed, strength versus control, someone would recall that night, not to settle arguments but to complicate them. The incident became shorthand, not for dominance, but for perspective. Bruce Lee himself rarely spoke about moments like these. When asked about public challenges, he redirected conversations toward process rather than outcome, efficiency rather than display, adaptability rather than certainty. Those who had been present at the arena understood why. What mattered was not what he had done. It was what he had not needed to do. He had not embarrassed anyone. He had not asserted superiority through repetition. He had not turned correction into spectacle. By limiting the demonstration to what was strictly necessary, he preserved its meaning. In time, the story took on a different quality. It was no longer about two men in a shared space. It became a reference for restraint itself, for the idea that mastery reveals itself not through assertion, but through the ability to end things before they begin. Those who heard the story secondhand often expected more. They asked where the strike landed, what technique was used, how such a small movement could have such an effect. The witnesses could never answer satisfactorily. The more precisely they tried to explain it, the less accurate it became, so they stopped trying. The event did not survive through mechanics, it survived through impression. Decades later, when discussions of Bruce Lee drifted toward myth, this story remained grounded. It did not grow louder with time. It did not accumulate embellishment. It stayed restrained, almost understated, as if preserving the character of the man it described. Those who had been there remembered something else as well. The moment did not end with applause. It did not conclude with recognition. It dissolved back into normalcy almost immediately. And yet, long after the night ended, they found themselves returning to it, not emotionally but intellectually. It asked a question without posing one. What does real control look like when it does not need witnesses? For those who had seen it, the answer was no longer theoretical. It had already occurred. And it had passed so quietly that many only understood its significance years later, when they realized they had never quite looked at strength the same way again.